Transgender Deathmatch Legend 2 is coming to Battlefield soon. A card-based beat-em-up for 2 players. An anthology of hyper-violent hex crawls. Find out more at deathmatch.ratwave.uk.
We ain't reading history books anymore, baby. We writing them.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the audio trailer for Transgender Deathmatch Legend 2 there. I'm just interrupting before the start of the podcast with a couple of bits of news and points of information. First of all, I just want to start with an apology saying that there were some audio issues in this recording. We recorded this interview back in March of this year, and there was an echo issue that took me a while to resolve. It was part of why there was sort of an unplanned hiatus in the middle of this. I have done my best to minimize that. I think this episode is perfectly listenable, and the content of the interview of Biscuit Fund Games is really great. I will just say there's occasionally some sort of interference and noise. Secondly, as a point that I don't flag up in the episode itself because of the order I record these in, is that this is going to serve as the season finale for This Is Your Life Path Season 2. I have massively enjoyed all of the conversations I had with different guests, and I really hope you've enjoyed listening. If you have enjoyed, please leave a 5-star rating or a comment on any of the podcast platforms you listen to, or do tweet or share about it. It's one of my favorite things of doing this podcast, beyond the conversations I have and the making of it, is getting to hear from people who say that they enjoyed it, or that interviews with people affected the way they think. In terms of This Is Your Life Path's future, I don't have any immediate plans for a 3rd season, but I am very much going to be releasing a sort of series of one-off specials as and when they come. And the first one of these is actually one that you can go to a live recording of. If you are at Norwich Gamescom on the 25th of August, you can come along and watch a live recording of a This Is Your Life Path episode where I will be interviewing Leo Hunt, the creator of Vaults of Van. The open secret of This Is Your Life Path for a while has been that it's an on-request podcast, so if you are a tabletop creator who would like to come on an episode in a sort of one-off special format, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You could look at the contact form on my website at ratwave.uk, or find me on social media. With all of that business out of the way, please enjoy this episode as much as I hope you've enjoyed the rest of this season. I'm Kayla Dice, and this is Your Life Path. I'm an out-of-control tabletop role-playing game designer, and on this show I talk to TTRPG designers and other exciting guests about everything that inspires or influences them away from role-playing. My guests today is the talented duo known as Biscuit Fund Games, composed of Chloe Montgomery and Alyssa Ridley. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Could you introduce yourselves more to the lovely audience?
So, hi, my name's Alyssa Ridley. I am half of Biscuit Fund Games. I put myself down as the lead editor on my CV and all that. I co-founded this company with my partner Chloe over here, and together we have made various silly and exciting games over the years. We've been going for this is our 4th year working on games together, and we have no plans to stop anytime soon.
And I'm Chloe, the other half of Biscuit Fund Games. I put myself down as the lead writer. I've been writing games for a little longer than Alyssa since 2019, but for the majority of my games writing time, I've been working with Alyssa. She keeps me from flying off the handle too much.
Yeah, and some of the games you've put out together,
Yes.
Goblin Country, Tournament Arc, Levante Papers.
As well as a bunch of little smaller things, like Mousequest. We've had some game jam stuff put out together. Yeah, we've kind of ran the gamut of stuff. Skirmish, wallet-friendly wargaming was a war game. We've done a lot of GM-less stuff in Belonging Outside Belonging.
We kind of transcend genre a little bit, though I think our general kind of guiding principle is accessibility. on a ground start. Everything that we make is kind of designed to be picked up and played without much in a way of like guff and that. I mean, like like Skirmish, one of the main driving forces behind that was we wanted to create a war game that you could play with dice, stuff that you had lying around. Because I like war games, I play war games, I spend too much money on war games. I'll enjoy the hobby, but you know, it's
there needs to be an entry point where you don't have to think, oh, I've got to put down 100 quid so that I can see if I like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
That same thing is kind of why we wrote a lot in Belonging Outside Belonging, just specifically in a way to engage with those systems for new players. Like, you know, Belonging Outside Belonging is not an intuitive system for a lot of people who are used to like the more traditional Dungeons and Dragons style. There is a GM, we roll dice, we fight monsters style. That there can be a level of dissonance there. So accessibility and moving from that kind of role playing to GM-less storytelling. Accessibility.
That makes sense. Yeah, I know so many people who sort of reluctantly say, like, I guess I transcend genre. And often they sound frustrated by it. I feel the same way about me, and I think I sound frustrated by it. So you said you put on your CVs lead editor and lead writer. Is that a conscious consideration you have about your collaboration, or is that just something you give for Johnny Government and Johnny Job applications?
I think that it's I put it down on there because it makes it look and sound more official, because Biscuit Fund Games is a tiny little enterprise, all things considered, and lead editor at an independent press, that you can spin to be a bit more, a bit nicer.
Rather than lass who makes words sound good.
Exactly, yeah. Though I suppose one of the things is that those do kind of circumscribe our roles within the company, kind of in brief anyway. I do tend to do a lot of the editing. So Chloe produces a lot of like the raw text, not like the raw ideas. She sits down and hashes them out into, you know, minimum viable product and that. And I sit down on her computer, because that's the one that has all the Affinity stuff on it. And she leaves me alone for about 7 or 8 hours. And she comes back to a whole bunch of music in her YouTube recommended list. And about 3,000 more words, all edited to work quite nicely.
See, Alyssa does when it's the sort of purple prose that this is what so-and-so does in this world. But then when we need the rules stuff, I can, you know, blash that out. And then she'll work out, does this actually make sense?
Yeah, it's like she programs, I walk into every wall and see if I can clip through any of them, so to speak.
That makes sense. Like a working relationship that is built around both a lot of like reining each other in, but also powering each other up, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we work very interdependently. Would that be the right word? Collaboratively.
Yeah.
Insofar as our process is heavily keyed off of the other.
It's really interesting how if you referred to a creative partnership as collaborative versus codependent, it sounds very differently emphasized, even though they're broadly the same meaning. So with like that sort of basis, we'll go into sort of more specific questions on your what's going on. But before that, we'll go through the sort of getting to know you part of the podcast. So where did you both grow up? You're both Northern lassies.
Mm-hmm. That's true, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up on the northwest coast of England in a tiny town called Workington. Didn't really leave it except for going for big shopping trips. Came up at Newcastle for university, and apart from a year where I didn't have anyone to live with, I've lived in Newcastle since, basically.
And I'm from Leeds. You know, not too far from where I actually ended up staying in Newcastle. I lived in Leeds for most of my life, all the way through secondary school and college. Went to Newcastle for uni, never came back.
Yeah.
This is where I live, and dragged Chloe along with me.
No, I like Newcastle. It's basically a new home for me.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of our new home. We're starting to kind of build our life together, both professionally and personally.
Do you, I guess I'll first address this to Chloe, do you feel maybe like in games like Goblin Country and other things that focus in on a community space, like a lot of belonging outside belonging games do you feel like that is informed by your experience of growing up in a sort of small town?
Yeah, I mean, I try to write it as a lot of my stuff ends up being from like a perspective of being the outsider in this community, or like your community is the outsider in the broader society. You've kind of been pushed to the edges, and you just got to make your living on those edges. Yeah, it's definitely sort of informed by that, not consciously, but
you know, a route that you can't necessarily shake in some way. And do you think it also maybe then ties to, and I guess both of you could answer this, how I guess you felt about moving to a new city at a university age?
I mean, there's an element of that. Like, I mean, I moved to a new city university age just because it was there, and I needed to go to university, and my first and second choices didn't work out. Newcastle was my insurance, and, you know, turned out to be a pretty bloody good insurance. But I didn't really like think too much about it at the time. It was just a thing that I expected and was expected of me to do. And it took me a while to find my feet. But the thing is that it was generally around moving to Newcastle was where I like first, you know, came into touch with my identity as a queer person, and just in general a lot about the person that I am now. So I think it's kind of difficult for me looking back on where I was in Leeds and then moving up to Newcastle, which was 10 years ago, which is nightmarish, because the two kind of acted as, they feel almost like different people in a sense, and for a long time I didn't really dwell on it. So I don't really think over much about that. Just, this is a place I came to and made my home.
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of away from home as a kid, a teenager, basically, just so I could sort of get out of that sort of shell that I'd built. I kind of started to work out who I was at sixth form, because that was a weird way away from home. Had to take an hour-long bus every day, but yeah, it's certainly coming to university helped me work out who I am, even if my degree didn't really help in the end.
I think it's an interesting thing having talked to lots of different people in terms of people who maybe, it sounds like for you, Alyssa, and you, Chloe, both always kind of had a sense of like, yeah, eventually I will leave home, and leave in a, I was going to say bigger way, but that maybe sounds like there's some judgment before or against it, but just like a larger jump than, say, someone who's just like, oh, I'll leave this house and live in another house in this town or something.
Yeah, like leaving home for me was basically a I left there and I had no intentions of ever returning to the life I had there, and it's kind of like I have a great relationship with my parents, which I understand is quite rare amongst queer people, especially trans people. But by the same token, I couldn't go back to living the way that I did back then, just because, well, I understand my parents as an adult now. I understand my parents as adults rather than as my parents, you know, in a lot of ways. But yeah, so in essence, yeah, it's like I kind of threw myself into this place where I could make a new life, partially because it was just a thing I thought I had to do, but also because it turned out that was kind of fun. And I think that it's telling that my relationship with my parents has massively improved over the past few years than when I was living with them, which sometimes got quite tetchy. So, yeah, hi Mum, hi Dad, if you're listening to this.
Yeah, I mean, after university, like I said, I'd spent a year living with my parents after university, after becoming a basically different person, and it definitely helped build our relationship to not be sort of uneven as it was. I definitely think that there's like Alyssa's saying, you see them as people rather than just as parents. And like they could tell from my time away at university that I was happier. And so basically they were happier. So we could have a better relationship there.
So, moving away from that slightly, because we've obviously now talked a lot about your life, I guess the question I have for both of you is where you first got your introduction to RPGs. Was that from a person, an event? Was that something you were into as younger people, or did it come when you were older?
I mean, I never really played RPGs as a kid. Like, I sort of touched on those fighting fantasy books by Ian Livingstone, or Steve Jackson. But both of them. But I never really understood the rules of them. But as a kid, I was always sort of designing games, like little mazes, and like playing worms on bits of paper, which doesn't really work, but you know, you're a kid, you make it work. Little level designers in games. And so eventually I just we ended up playing Dungeons and Dragons in university, and I got really into reading pirated copies of other RPGs, and I was like, oh, we can do better stuff than just, can I read these, can I play these? And then I ended up just writing one-page RPGs in my bedroom, and yeah, ended up building off of that.
You took the RPG red pill very early on.
Yeah.
Whereas you, Alyssa, I know you came to RPGs. Was it through Chloe, or were you into RPGs already but came to writing and creating through Chloe?
Oh, I was into RPGs long before I met Chloe.
Okay.
It's hard to kind of put like where the actual date for it, but I first kind of got into RPGs as a consequence of getting into Warhammer. So as I say, war games were kind of my my gateway into this kind of tabletop play. It was because when I was younger, I actually went to schools outside of my catchment area, which had the problem of I had no friends around where I was, which meant that I was really unable to play games around things. Like, I loved card games from a kid, but after my mum accused me of cheating in a game, she refused to play against me ever again.
What?
Okay, she still maintains that.
She's still like, no, you were cheating as a child.
But the thing is, I had cheated, but the actual incident she was
okay,
I didn't cheat on that one. It's just it was a miscommunication over who was the defending Pokemon. It's the one that's been...
Okay, I can't believe it was cheating at Pokemon as well.
Yeah.
But this was the fractures in relationship that you had to go away to uni to fix.
Yeah, this is it. We were never over like wheezing poison itself or her Pokemon, and then eventually fix that. But yeah, to circle back to it, where I was going is I had people to play with at this Warhammer group that was outside of work, that was outside of school, and this was great. It was a whole arts award thing where basically we were given a bunch of free Warhammer, and we painted it, and we did like a report about like what we'd learned and done over the thing. It was really fantastic. Shout outs to Ed and the Kirkleys Young People Service. Whoop, whoop. But while I was there, I met some friends, some from my school, some from elsewhere, who were playing an RPG called Dark Heresy, which is the Warhammer 40k official role-playing game. And I played a little bit in some of their sessions, and I really enjoyed it. And it wasn't long before I was GMing my own very not well put together game there. And then I started playing I started actually GMing for that same group outside of this Warhammer club, a hack of the system to work as Neon Genesis Evangelion. It was Adeptus Evangelion, one of the old versions, and I basically ran that on every Saturday for about 3-4 years. Eventually dropped it for various reasons, but that was kind of my gateway, and I've never kind of left the space ever since then.
I was just going to say, so both of you discovered like RPGs when like in a text form as opposed to accidentally reinventing them in child play. And then very quickly sort of moved to a step that's closer to design, either like Chloe, you said you dived in, wrote your one-page games. Alyssa, you very quickly, it sounds like, went to hacking. What about design is it that compelled you, do you think?
I think that just one of the reasons it kind of designed me, because I did make a lot of changes to the games that I was playing, because the thing is that when I'm being presented with a system of rules, and those rules don't quite represent the image that the thing or the image that I want to conjure, then I want to change those rules. Especially just because it was, around the time that I'd learned about the existence of this mysterious Rule Zero. And it was interesting to me, because, in the video games I was playing and other tabletop games, you couldn't say, actually, no, I think that my guy would beat your guy. I just kind of realised, wait a minute, I can change things. And that opened a thing to me. Like, I designed my whole pantheon of angels in my own weird setting, and rules for angelic corruption, and all manner of things which, in retrospect, were probably kind of red flags in a 13-year-old. But, all that kind of stuff. That's what really started me out.
I mean, when I was GMing for this Dungeons & Dragons group, I was largely making a lot of stuff up, so I was like, well, what can I do with this stuff that I'm making up? Could I use these rules that I'm making? Could I make my own thing with these? I mean, it's just writing lots of instructions, and at the time I was doing that a lot for my university work as well, so it just sort of flowed into itself. I don't know, I've always just been making up games in my head, I suppose, so why not just write them down, make a bit of money?
It makes sense. Do either of you write much out of TTRPGs? Both have you in your life and do you currently?
Yeah, I mean, I once did like a full year of creative writing stuff. I've always been trying to write stories. I've never gotten into like fanfic or anything, but I've always been writing like original.
Oh, you seem like such a fanfic person. I'm really sorry.
Right. But yeah, no, I've done lots of creative writing. Like, I was trained as a screenwriter in university, so like I'm saying, that's lots of writing instructions for other people.
It does make sense. I feel there's a similar relationship between the fact of like, oh, you don't write a game, you write a book that's instructions for how to play a game. And in the same way, like, no one writes a film, they write instructions for directors and actors.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, like, one of the main things that I'd written in university was like a murder mystery, sort of focused on the people like reeling from this murder, much more than the actual mystery at the heart of it. But the mystery was sort of meant to be built around the edges, and it was a sort of thing where in my head the audience would be trying to work out who did this mystery with the clues presented to them before people on screen had been presented all the clues themselves, and there'd be this whole media world around it, like using websites and stuff, like, oh, you've got a bus schedule, could this person have been in the town at that time, sort of thing. Just lots of the world around it.
Sort of unable to stop yourself from writing games if ever given access to the word, to the written word.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Is that like sort of writing backstory what maybe led to having these sort of in-fiction extracts that are all throughout Tournament Arc, and then Levante Papers is something that's very much relying on like writing that is diegetically
Tournament Arc
fiction focused.
kind of imagines an anime for itself, because it is very anime inspired. And like you're saying with Levante, that is imagining this whole other world where people are writing about things in that world. I always like the idea of like a little look into this this fictional world, but not just, oh, here's 50 pages on it. It's, oh, here's a glimpse, you can imagine the rest, because whatever you're going to imagine is going to be better than whatever I could write, really.
Next question, this one is a sort of openish thing, and then I'll go through some more like process-based questions. This may be an odd question. Do you, because you talked there, Chloe, just about like feeling that from a young age, and for Alyssa as well, do either of you remember, or I guess I think about titles like writer, editor, designer. Do you remember when you first considered yourself each of those things? Like actively sort of thinking of yourself, oh, I'm a writer, oh, I'm an editor, oh, I'm a designer now.
Yes, I can conceive of that. I mean, I conceived of myself as a writer. Like, as a child, I believe that I was I was very, very arrogant when I was younger. Took me a lot of adventures in high school before I managed to get that under control. But yeah, I believe myself that I was going to be. I improvised a lot of like the games that I was running and things on the spot because I had confidence in myself as a writer. Went through that. I basically started conceiving myself as an editor in like late high school, so it was like college because it was a combined thing, and in university, where I started copy editing other people's stuff, just for fun, for free, for like a bag of sweets from the nearby shop. Small things like that. I just started working on things with other people, you know, and that just became something I kind of did in the back of my mind, until it was, you know, just a thing I did, a thing I would do, and until Biscuit Fund Games, it was, I suppose, I imagined myself as an editor for fun, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I first sort of thought of myself as a writer, certainly when I was trying to be a screenwriter, but it was after sort of our game started to pick up steam that I was like, oh yeah, I'm a writer as well as, you know, someone who works behind a bar or whatever I was doing at the time. It's always kind of been a as well as. It's never like got me a house or anything, so I don't know if I would ever say until, like, I don't know, I always say, oh, when we're rich and famous. It's like, I don't know what qualifies as being rich or famous, but maybe then I can feel like I am properly a writer rather than just that as well as something else.
Yeah, it's interesting where you draw that line. Like, I think it's interesting, Alyssa, going, as a child, I conceived of myself as a writer, whereas you now, having published multiple games, still going, I don't know if I'd consider, if I feel able to just say, I am a writer as a complete sentence without clarifying it. It's interesting there. But speaking of editing and joining, I guess that is a good link in to a question I've never got to ask on this podcast before, which is, oh my god, how did you meet?
So, we kind of met twice, really. We had our first meeting twice, which was the first time we actually met, like, as people, was at Pride, I want to say 2019?
Yeah, thereabouts.
Yeah, thereabouts, yeah. So, a big thing that, we have a mutual friend who had kind of organised a bunch of people going up into Pride. We'd done the parade. We waited around the several, like, grueling hours it took to go through the gate to get into the actual main event square, which is inevitably terrible. It's overpriced beer and a lot of mud. But anyway, Chloe was there. I'd never met her before. We just chatted idly.
Yeah, I didn't really know her. I thought she was probably too cool for me because she was all goffed up.
I thought she was too cool for me.
So there you go.
Because you looked gorgeous.
There you go. But yeah, Courtney, our shared friend there, invited me to this server for trans people in the north of England. I think I was possibly in that before that. But Alyssa was one of the moderators on that server. So I kept posting in there and she kept posting at me. And then eventually I was like, oh, does anyone want to read one of my games? It's a bit longer than my other ones. Can anyone make sure this makes sense? And so Alyssa pops up like, oh, I'll read it. I'll edit it for you. And yeah.
Yeah, because that's me being all, I'm an editor for fun at this point. You know, I copy edit people's work. It's what I do. And I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm gonna slide into her DMs and be like, hey, mind if I proofread Rebellion 30XX?
Yeah, it is, looking back, a terrible game, but yeah. And then after a few months we ended up going on a date, and then 6 months later we moved in together, so...
We did kind of U-haul it a bit.
No, but there was a pandemic on.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel there's like a U-Haul exemption for if it happened in the pandemic. U-Haul amnesty. But yeah, U-Haul as creative partners as well as romantic partners.
Yeah, we kind of had this thing where both of them kind of rose together, which you know, I think I wouldn't recommend anyone else to do it, but it seems to have worked quite nicely for us.
Yeah, we managed it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, a question I have is, how do you feel your collaboration has grown, both since that very first start, but also through different points? I know, like, you both have a co-writing credit on Tournament Arc, unlike, say, Goblin Country, where the writing credit is solely Chloe's, and the editing credit is then Alyssa. Do you feel it's different depending on the project, or is it just something that you feel out and has developed?
Yeah, I mean, it is largely depending on the project, because like with Goblin Country, I wrote that in a week for a game jam, and then we slowly hashed it into a sellable product. Whereas Tournament Arc, like, I wrote a lot of the rules, but then Alyssa wrote a lot of the prose around that. So
yeah, it's like we were talking about earlier, the like the fiction in the Tournament Arc, in a Tournament Arc book. That was something that I'd written. Is I just originally it wasn't in the book, but I was like, I want something to put on the opening chapter bumpers. And I was like, I'm gonna write something. As just to kind of build off what Chloe was saying, is I think that our relationship has as two halves of the business has changed over the years, but it's just basically become we're more used to working with one another rather than we have specific roles when we get into a game system. I mean, you know, I tend to edit, she tends to write. She digs up the gems, I cut them, so to speak. But different projects have required different things from us. Like, for example, A Hunt Through the Bitter Cold. That was just me. Chloe took on the role of editing for that.
yeah, she just started writing this 70-page epic, and then I just sort of looked through it like, I don't understand that, I don't get that, sort of for every other sentence, making her rewrite it. But
yeah, and it came out.
Had a bit of the Freaky Friday swap for that.
Yeah, but I think the fact that like we're actually capable of doing that emblematizes that our roles in the company, they are quite mutable. Even if we put on for, you know, as you were saying, Johnny tax return, that Chloe's head writer and head editor, our roles are a little bit more mutable.
It's a far more fluid collaboration, in truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I guess that does link to my next question, which is actually sort of a two-part one. The big question was me wondering, how consciously do you think about your authorial voice in writing? Both, how do you, say, Chloe, think about it when you're doing the main bit of writing on a project? If you are both writing, do you see that stuff as more separated out? And then I guess the linked question was, and what kind of reading that you've done over your life do you think maybe does inform your unique voices?
I mean, most of my games that I've written don't really have like a specific given authorial voice. But like obviously Levante, we're putting on a persona of a character who's then writing something. It's very intentional with that, but like for character writing. But for most of my games, it's just sort of as a helpful guide sort of writing. It's not like of a character speaking. I am writing something at the moment that's trying to be intentionally in the voice of a character, and sort of a conversation between this character and the character that you're going to be playing in the game. Lots of, oh, you are a warrior, pick one of these, and then it's like, I am brave, I am whatever.
It's like we did that Game of the Gods, which never really manifested.
Yeah,
we
were writing a game that was sort of meant to be like a spin-off of Skirmish, like sort of based on Inscription, called Game of the Gods, where it was like this god of games had created the final game and handed it off to some minor gods after all the good gods had fucked off. And it was sort of like, you are this, and it was like sort of the author figure was a sort of high and mighty speaking down to its peons.
It's like, oh ye minor gods, chooseth your peon. We didn't use like that kind of but that's
language,
sort of, that was the vibe, you know. Like, these are the peons that you shall play with. The thing there. I mean, like, when regards to, I mean, we didn't end up doing that much with that concept. I mean, it's still kicking around. We might do something with it eventually. But when it comes to like authorial voice, I mean, as an editor, I think that my authorial voice comes from two specific texts. As a writer, it's Homestuck. Yeah. As an editor, it's the core rulebook for Warhammer 40,000 9th edition. It's basically as a filthy hamstock. It basically, that kind of informality, in quite gamified text helped me kind of develop my voice as well. Just there's some kind of unspoken comedy about you obtain one open bracket numeral 1 close bracket 1 item or whatever that I think is item open bracket S close bracket S. There's something about that I kind of started to take up with me, but I think that as a rules writer, Warhammer 40k 9th edition was really helpful for me because it is both internally comprehensive and bloody annoying. The thing is everything is laid out, and everything is laid out in consistent text, but it's also done inefficiently. So basically, it's how to present consistent rules with consistent language, but also things where I noticed that we could edit those down. Where we can make that work a lot better. Like in our first proper project together, Skirmish, a big thing that I had was we had very limited space, and I realised that when we were doing something what do we call the mounted ones?
The Cavaliers.
That wasn't the name, but it was something like it's something Cavaliers, was they had this rule where they'd be like, oh, I can ride a D6, that's my horse. That's, it was that translation of what do I need this to mean on a book? What are the possible holes in this level geometry that I can accidentally misunderstand or cause the game to completely fall apart? And how do you fit that all within about a quarter of a page of A5 and still have it be readable? And the rulebook, that 9th edition rulebook really helped me with that one.
That makes sense, like an early sort of rules influence. Yeah, do you feel like you, Chloe, know what kind of stuff has gone into how Chloe's writing sounds?
So I couldn't pick out any specific influences, but like when Alyssa said Homestuck there, like I got it because it's like Homestuck speaks in a very like adventure game you are this character. It like puts you directly into the shoes, and you are you are this character choosing to do these things, even if you have no influence on the story, reading it 10 years after it was written. It's like you are choosing to do these things, and it's like, yeah, stated as fact. That's how I write a lot of my games. Like, oh, you are mice going on an adventure. You are whatever.
Yeah, that's actually I'm now also thinking enough about this that I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can guess which game designers are Homestucks
Yeah,
based on
absolutely.
if they have a similar thing. But jumping to a different topic now, I was thinking about Goblin Country. I really enjoy Goblin Country. I've played it twice. I've played it twice at 2 different Dragon Meets. But I was wondering, I guess, what specifically informs your conception of goblins, which can be such a sort of wide-ranging category in some senses.
I mean, when I wrote Goblin Country, it was for this Goblin Day or Goblin Week jam or something, and I didn't want to just do the generic, oh, we're tricksy little thieves and stealers. So I made this idea that the goblins lived there first, and then they were pushed out by the humans, so they were sort of the second people.
Yeah. That was kind of an element that we ended up kind of paring back, because we kind of realised this maybe isn't our story to tell.
Yeah, there was an issue at first where it felt like, oh, this is a story about an indigenous people. We are white British people. We are not the person to write this game. And so that was a big worry about bringing Goblin Country from this game jam, like Word doc, into a full product. But my idea that goblins are just a natural thing in the world. They're made of moss. They're forced to live in caves. They would have lived in open fields and towns, but the humans came and pushed them out because they're filthy and made of mud and whatever. And so I kind of play them as comedy characters rather than as, villains. But characters in the story are going to pose them as villains, but they are not written as such.
Is it one of the core concepts of like goblins that we did? We can put it into 3 words, and that is funny little guys.
Yeah.
Right? Funny little guys is what we wanted goblins to be. Because the thing about goblins is that, especially in like a lot of fiction, tying back into the kind of Tolkien Warcraft side, especially the Warcraft side, is they are like really racially charged. It's bat-eared, hook-nosed, greedy. It's like that. There's a lot of very dangerous stuff you can touch on with that. So this is kind of why I was quite taken by them, that just being like made of moss, and they are just little creatures. They like, we didn't want to have any like real world analogues to any culture or anything. Effectively, if anything, they're kind of drawn from a little bit of a bucolic like childhood innocence.
Yeah.
They look at the world through very innocent eyes. They have no concept of like nation or grand wars or anything, which is something that we kind of developed in with the gods as well.
Yeah, the gods of Goblin Country are always pushing you to try to be something better than you are, but it's like, I don't want to go to a war. I want to steal a pie off a windowsill.
Exactly.
It kind of puts me in a mind of a conflict between like the inverted commas natural world versus like industrialization and stuff.
There's an element to that. Part of the reason that goblins don't really like humans is because they keep on building these big towns that are smelly and big and that aren't nice to look at.
And adventurers keep coming and nicking all their cool shinies. It's like, get your own.
Yeah. That's kind of the whole thing about how we wanted to do goblins, was them just as absolute counter to the way that they are presented in a lot of these games, is like really involved in the world at all. They're just trying to have a good time and they're trying to survive. And
like, there's no rules for combat in Goblin or Kobold Country. It's like, if you get into a fight, you're just gonna die Because you're not meant to fight. You're
Yeah.
just a guy trying to live your little
You're just... You weren't meant to fight or do taxes. You were meant to frolic in a field and look for shiny objects.
Exactly. That is the core concept of goblins to us.
It's like, and that's the spin of Goblin Country, is that you are forced to work in a mine by your evil dragon overlord. It's like sort of, it's sort of a version of the world where the goblins lost to this industrialization. What can you do against this evil, impossible to kill dragon?
Yeah. It's like the dragon, like Kobold Country as opposed to Goblin Country, has like an explicit antagonist, which is the dragon, which might not be a literal dragon, but it's like, it's the thing that rules you. It's your Balrog, it's your Great Beholder, it's your Archlich. It's the person what is making you live in this fortress and build all this stuff. And it's not something that you're necessarily unhappy with doing. It's just that you'd rather be doing it for yourself rather than for them. But they are so important that, like, when they show up as a setting element, the entire table takes turns to speak as them, because if they are here, something has gone very, very wrong, and also probably everybody is about to die, unless you can talk your way out.
In the same way as if your boss comes to your desk at the office, something's gone terribly, terribly wrong.
You have a problem with authority, Mr. Anderson.
It's SLT all over again.
Yeah. I was going to segue into this with a joke about changing code, which is a reference to various rugby codes and how people are cross-code players, and then I realised that is far too niche. Both for you two and also anyone listening. Talking about the differences between rugby union and rugby league, a thing my audience definitely cares about. But, switching rugby code as it were, Tournament Arc is aping a specific genre experience. It's the sports anime RPG. What were you hoping to translate taking this into a different medium? And were there any things you found particularly difficult to replicate?
Oh, so Tournament Arc as the sports anime RPG has been a bit of a thorny subject that I've tended to find with like some reception to Tournament Arc, because as we have established, both Chloe and I we're white, we're British, we are not we're not from Japan. We haven't any experience of living in Japan, and there were some questions raised about why are you making a game about a sports anime. Thing is, with Tournament Arc, we weren't looking to kind of create. When we say it's a sports anime RPG, we're not trying to create the experience of living in an anime, so to speak, like a specifically Japanese one. There's no like rules for having having like a culture festival. There's no episode or anything about that. What we wanted to do was kind of create a way that feels like watching one of these very episodic, very competition-driven shows that a lot of Western media just doesn't quite get into. It's because like a lot of the media that we were kind of dealing with, especially over in the UK, there's a thing called British brevity, which is quite well known amongst like non-British producers of television, which is where an English show lasts 6 episodes,
and it's the longest running show on British television.
Yeah, it's like it's slow. It's slow. It's not terribly serialized, and the development is quite rapid, or not particularly well paced for this kind of play. Whereas, basically, it all sprang around because I was watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! Has this delightful pacing, this kind of Monster of the Week style thing where you've got all these duels and you got your ups and your downs, and you know realistically that who's going to win a duel, because is it going to be silly antagonists of the week with their bug deck, or is it going to be the main character? We wanted to kind of create that feeling of these ups and downs that small incremental growth through like a tournament setting. You know, we wanted you to go from the beginnings of Duelist Kingdom, where you're just on a boat, you're not sure what's going to happen, to when you're dueling in the Shadow Realm for the sake of your grandpa's soul, and this feeling of meaningful progression as you went up into that. And I think that was the reason that we were drawn to like sports anime as a concept, is because that kind of incremental progression, we found that in the pacing and structure of anime, whereas we didn't really find it elsewhere.
Yeah, it's not a game about anime as like a genre. It's more anime as a sort of narrative, like arc, like
A sort of, a narrative structure based genre rather than a trappings and concrete setting elements genre.
Yeah.
I mean, when we were writing the game, like, Alyssa was pulling a lot from Yu-Gi-Oh! And, like, I watched it as a kid, and, like, watching the episodes with Alyssa, it's like, how did I'm so sorry for my parents that I made them sit through this. Pulling a lot from Video Game High School, which is, like, a really kind of terrible, but I love it, web series about a kid who goes to a school for video games. And it makes zero sense, but it's like, oh, at the start he's like a loser with his keyboard that he got from Best Buy, and he goes to, like, at the end of the first season, he's playing in the varsity team to secure his spot back in the school. And by the end of the third season, he's leading the entire school to save it from some energy drink trying to take over the school. It's like that sort of arc of the underdog, literally a playbook in the game, leading their little team to become better and better. It's like, I would call this live action American made thing a sports anime, even though it isn't animated at all or Japanese or anything, but it has that same sort of trapping,
That same sort of pacing, yeah.
yeah
And I think also the final thing is why we call it the sports anime RPG is because of marketing.
yeah
Sports anime RPG.
Yeah.
You instantly know what we're going for when we say it. As it's like if we could have used a more nuanced title for it, you know, like the incremental sports simulation adventure.
Well, I guess that's the thing, is you are trying to imply something about narrative structure, which if you just said sports RPG is not conveyed in the same way.
It's like sports RPG to me is like, oh, we're getting into the nitty gritty of like simulation. It's like, oh, I kick the football with my +3 boot, and oh, I rolled a 6, so that means I can curve it into the net slightly. Okay, move your miniature for the ball up 6 spaces.
Yeah, I mean that's Alan Shearer's Football Dungeons, which I haven't written yet, but will do eventually.
You do both live in a very big football city. Are either of you like big into real sports at all, or is
my mum tried to get me into Liverpool like so much? Like, I went to Anfield a bunch as a kid, but like I never really attached to it. But that I've cared the most about was roller derby, and that's just because one of my housemates played it at the time.
I mean, I feel like a sense of loyalty to Leeds United, just partially because a lot of my dad's, well, my mum's and my dad's friends actually came from doing match days and that, and that's where I got that's where I had my first ever drink at the ripe old age of Redacted. I wouldn't really call myself like a sports fan. I love wrestling, but I haven't really gone to a show since Pandy, so I want to get back into that, but I'm poor.
Yeah, and wrestling in itself is, I mean, wrestling's ultimately
Wrestling's a sports anime.
halfway between sports anime and panto. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah,
But no, that makes sense. That's just, it was interesting, and I wondered, like, obviously the focus makes sense, it's this narrative structure, but also it's like, did that derive much from media or from your own sort of sporting experiences?
No, I mean, sports anime entirely pulls from media rather than the act of actually playing sport. I don't know if it actually made it into the book, but there's like a big list of like influences And it's like, she's getting the book.
Yeah, I have a tournament arc to hand, so I am just... You do shout out Yu-Gi-Oh! And Video Game High School in the book itself, but I don't think you have, like, the big long list.
Okay, so I found the original list in our old playtest document, so if you want, I can read that out to you.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Let's read that out, and then I've got a question to ask you about Levante.
Yeah, so, like we're saying, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Video Game High School, Legend of Korra, then it's Prepara, Haikyuu, Pokemon, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, BNA Brand New Animal, like Blaseball, which is big at the time. Who even cares about Blaseball anymore?
Oh, it's dead.
Exactly. That one baseball scene in Twilight where they're hitting the ball with lightning. One episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Taking Me Out to the Hollow Suite, where they...
Death to the opposition!
Where they play baseball against some Vulcans, but they lose, but it's like they win because they had a better time. Yeah, it's just that sort of stuff. And then we've got a picture of Surgeon Ernie Calhoun from Video Game High School pointing at a sign for "It's all about the game." Like, that's the sort of ethos that we wanted people to go into tournament arc with. We hope it's come through, but
I think it does. So, for the Levante papers, you, as well as bringing on various writers, including one very talented, award-winning podcast host, you also wrote many of the essays yourself. I was wondering, I guess, in your approach to writing, were you often thinking of this as like, who's the character I'm embodying this? Or were you thinking more, what would I write if I was in this setting, essentially? Yeah, and were you conscious of any specific influences? I don't know, for me in the writing I did for Levante, I definitely was really reminded of essays, like first year assignments I wrote at like 3 a.m. or things, but I don't know if you had different non-fiction influences that might have informed the essays.
I mean, Olivia Levante herself was my first D&D character, so I'd kind of already found a voice for her.
Oh.
An upper class, I've been trained, I know magic, I'm much better than you, I know what I'm talking about. But then, of course, when she's in the field, all of her learnings fly out the window. Because it doesn't matter if you know exactly how much tension you need to put into a mimic's gums to pry its teeth out. If it's coming and biting at you, you need to know where exactly its swishy bits are. So she was very much a fish out of water, very much, oh, well, I'll stay at the back and I'll cast my spells, but you big folks with the swords, you go swing them at the hobgoblin, yes, darling?
It's like we kind of come into her in the Levante papers, like, at a position far later in her life, though.
Yeah. So Levante Papers is like she's stopped adventuring, she's gotten all this information that she needed to from adventuring, and she's noticed all of these like guidebooks about monsters don't feature the sort of nitty-gritty that you need to know, other than like, oh, line your windowsills with salt. It's like, why does the salt stop the ghosts coming in? Like, that's the sort of question she would ask. Like, why do dragons keep gold? Well, it keeps their eggs warm or something like that. Like, that's the sort of thing she would be trying to work out. But then, like you're saying with essay writing, it is a lot of undergrad papers trying to make you sound a bit more formal than you are, trying to make yourself sound a bit smarter than you are. And that was, at least with Levante, I don't know about the other characters, but it was a lot of trying to make you sound just a little bit smarter than the assumed reader in this fantasy world. Like, oh, I use long words, so I must know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so Chloe, like, did the majority of the characters that she wrote in the Levante papers were Olivia Levante, whereas I wrote like a lot of the more diverse things. Like, I didn't write anything whole cloth about from Levante's perspective.
Yeah.
A lot of the characters I kind of generated my own voice from, based on like what I thought the character would do, and none of them I think are really me. Like Mazen Schweitzer, the golem professor of medicine. He's just the doctor from Star Trek Voyager. The name is even taken from one of the episodes where he names himself Schweitzer. big ups to everybody who got that before me.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, and Greyweaver, who's the druid who's talking about like druidic mutation and that, is actually an old character I took from a Mutants and Masterminds game I played years and years ago, a system that I deeply hate, but who was like an urban druid, who was also a Vietnamese war veteran, and could like do Bayonetta things with Needhog out of concrete. But yeah, is a lot of these things were characters that I was creating, that I'd already created, and I've already got their voice nailed down. I didn't write as myself, I wrote as that character. There's quite a joy to it, I feel, is choosing to write something in a way that's not me. A big part of my editing process was going back and removing myself from my writing.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I need to make sure that all of these characters I'm writing look like different academics with different experiences and different beliefs and different voices, literally and figuratively.
It's not just recolours of the same character.
Exactly, yeah. Which is why, I've got Schweitzer. Schweitzer's talking like in very, in quite persnickety, quite mean-spirited long words, whereas Greyweaver is, I think, the voice perhaps closest mine. Quite clipped and informal about it. So I've got, I can't remember their name off the top of my head, but the one I've got for all the things about the economics of dungeon delving and vending machines. The vending machine was caused by somebody who was going to do an essay about vending machines. We commissioned the art for it, and then they didn't. They dropped out before doing the vending machine essay. So we had this vending machine art, and I was like, gotta write an article about these.
That actually is interesting because it does link to another question I had, which was talking about the fact that you've collaborated with artists on most of your major releases. Not all. I know for Bitter Cold you worked with a lot of public domain stuff, but I was wondering in that sense, like, how does the relationships and collaboration with artists, and just, I guess, generally in terms of thinking visually, is that something that informs your writing a lot, or do you see it more often as separated things out, like, we'll do this part, then this part, then this part,
I mean,
and we'll go back when we need to or stuff?
Largely, it feels like we do most of the writing first, and then we're like, oh, well, this will be enhanced with a picture. This would make the reader pay attention to this, or get a better grasp of it with a picture.
Like, the artist we got for the Levante papers, so big ups to Eddie Black if you're listening.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic work. Basically, because I was the one who kind of actually put in the commission for all of the art, is what I'd done is I got a brief from everybody involved in the project, just basically what kind of illustration we think would make that look really cool, and I sent a large Google Doc with like visual references, a description of what I wanted, and I sent that off to them, and I was like, okay, this is what we got. And that was kind of compartmentalized. And they came back to us in a few weeks like, this is what we got, this looks really cool, and I'm like, hey. But yeah, I suppose there is an element of we do this compartmentalized because neither of us are artists in the visual sense.
Yeah.
So we've always had to kind of reach outside of us to get art. I mean, as I say, we've got a laundry list of artists that have worked for us, on a contract basis. I mean, we've recently just worked again with big ups to them. Halloween's great. For Mousewife, and they're also the face of Goblin Country. Like they did the lovely goblin on the front and a lot of the art inside.
I love the goblin on the front of Goblin Country. I remember the first time I saw them and I was just like, they're so gender.
Yeah. We'll see if we can pop some socials for these people in the description. Yeah, we'll get socials.
Yeah, if you give me everyone's acts, I will, during the editing process, make sure I do that.
Good.
And now I'm committing to this live on air, so if I haven't done that, I was about to say, you're allowed to send mean messages to me, listeners of the podcast. You're not. You're allowed to send polite messages to me only.
Hooray!
Okay, so that makes sense. Yeah, you compartmentalize it a lot because it's been a thing. You're doing the thing of, okay, I've got the writing done, now I can approach art rather than necessarily going back. Have you ever rewritten something in response to art?
Yes. This example that we've got of this vending machine art being commissioned for a vending machine article, which doesn't end up happening, and then I'm like, oh hell, I need to write all about this. And you see, I'm kind of plugging away at this essay about dungeon economics, and how it's simply not viable to keep on going into hellholes and coming out with demon gut. Can't sell these here because they're illegal. So I had to kind of awkwardly jam the vending machine into that, because I'm not gonna not use this really nice art that's been done. But I have to rewrite my whole thing about criminology and criminal finance in a magical world to incorporate vending machines somehow. And I think I did all right with it, but I'm not. It's not what I would have chosen.
It's a different challenge in terms of writing compared to your usual preferred way of working.
There's certainly some stuff in Tournament Arc where we got some of the little spot pieces to fill the pages, and they had a lot of unique mascots in them, so we sort of reworked some of the names of places to sort of feature those mascots.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a catfish, so we made the California catfish or something.
That makes sense. And it's cute, and I think, it does tie a book together as a bigger whole almost.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions now that are just for you as individuals. So, sorry to each of you who in turn will have to sit in silence. So you can chat up if you have anything to contribute. But this first one I'll do the one just for Chloe. You've worked on a duology of games about mice folk. Mentioned the Mousewife briefly earlier. You have in development Mousequest, which together sort of form 2 sides of this wider story about mouse folk. And I guess I was wondering, what is it about that, not entirely, I guess, genre element that appeals to you, that is something you're interested in exploring?
Yeah, I mean, the Mousewife, Mousequest weren't designed to sort of slot together so neatly as they do. It was just sort of from a point of view of wanting to do games about where you are explicitly the bottom of the food chain. You have to avoid danger. You can't get into a fight, much like with the country games. If you get into a fight, you're going to lose it. It's very much about having to sneak around and be the little thief. You can't be going and stabbing humans in the back. They don't care about your little needle because they've got big feet that will stamp on you. But Mousewife actually does sort of fit into the opposite of Mousequest, where Mousequest is this game where you're playing as mice, people, or borrowers, or whatever. You're going out into your house to find something to keep yourselves alive for the rest of the week, get supplies that you need. Whereas Mousewife is about the people who have to stay at home while people are going out and getting these essential supplies. And about writing a journal of, is your husband going to come home from the house, sort of thing. But they do sort of fit together, and the Mousequest has this whole element of in between sessions of this adventure play. You are living your life at home with the people who can't go out on adventures. How do they feel about that? It's you could use Mousewife as a way to explore these characters who aren't going out on adventures.
So do you feel that interest in characters like the Mousewife and the element of that featured in Mousequest, where it's a character who can't go on adventures for a variety of reasons, which can sometimes be about, disability, sort of accessibility barriers. Do you feel that's informed by your own personal life?
I don't really think that I've written it specifically from a perspective of myself not being able to go on adventures, because I am relatively able-bodied and like I am healthy, but I'm not especially physically fit, I suppose. But there's nothing in my life that is like, oh, I can't go on adventures, whatever. I suppose there's like an element of, oh, I don't have the money to do everything that I want to do, but living a life at home isn't any less of a nice thing than any other sort of life, which is sort of the message of Mousewife, but also the element of you have to rely on outside sources to keep you going, and that is a worry constantly. So I suppose it is a little bit informed by that, now that I'm sort of speaking it out. But
yeah, I suppose that's a danger of this podcast. But no, that's really interesting, and I think, yeah, it makes sense, and I think it is a thing, having read both those games, where I can look at it and go, there's never a suggestion that the world, the inner world that is sketched by Mousewife is any less fulfilling of a life. I think that is both interesting but also very important, and I think in different creative hands there's, I don't know, accidental sort of issues that could have come up.
I think it's also just important to stress that Chloe likes mice, and that's why she makes lots of games about mice.
yeah, I like borrowers.
They're little and cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know one of your favourite films is the Ghibli Arietti, right?
Yeah.
And so I assume that's a big influence in there.
Yeah, like Pikmin, borrowers. I don't know. There's not enough stuff about little people going on adventures.
And you wanted to fill that void.
Yeah, exactly.
So just for Alyssa, A Hunt Through the Bitter Cold draws inspiration from like the roguelike deck building video game genre. Which in itself is interesting in terms of that being a video game genre that draws influence from analog games, and then you've looped that back. What I wanted to ask is, what was it specifically you wanted to draw from that medium? What did you think, like, well, this is an enjoyable thing in these video games, and I can transfer it to this new medium and capture?
What I wanted to do with Hunt for the Bitter Cold is I wanted to kind of tap the kind of brutal, mechanistic nature of gameplay in a system like Inscription, a video game, a deck builder like a Slay the Spire or Nowhere Prophet or something like that, where encounters are presented before you, and there are perhaps defined options in how you approach them. Is that the road itself unfolds before you, and your options to respond to that are quite limited. I mean, it's like a big part of what kind of drew me towards making A Hunt Through the Bitter Cold so Inscription inspired is because I can't play Inscription for the first time again. Inscription is, by dint of itself, kind of, I can't play it again with the same mindset. And as a consequence, I wanted to create an environment where you could make that harsh journey without like without a video game supporting that. I wanted it to be a place where, fitting in with this whole theme of accessibility, 2 players with 2 decks of cards could make this adventure come into being. So effectively, I wanted to be able to translate a grim thing where these are the options that are presented to you, taking away some of the agency of a lot of tabletop games and tying it a little bit more to like the kind of board game experience, I guess. I wanted there to be a little bit of room for role playing here, but I don't think I particularly succeeded in that. I think that, you know, the majority of play in Bitter Cold is, you know, after the first time you encounter something or whatever, you kind of click through the dialogue, as it were, because you're not reading that for the 6th time as you go through your next attempt. But I think another thing I also wanted to do when I was saying, aside from just the mechanics of it while making this adventure something you could do in real life, is death. So death is something that in a lot of my own like independent game exploration, not necessarily with Biscuit Fund Games, well, I mean, as part of it, but not necessarily with Chloe, is playing with death in tabletop games. Like, a big part of our games, like, interplay with death in a strange way. So, for example, we've got Goblin Country. You fight, you die. we wanted to make it so that combat was something that you wanted to avoid at all costs. But also, there's this feeling of you're just part of the community. There is another goblin for you to take, right? You don't necessarily need to get too attached to your goblin if you're going to put them at risk like this. Like in a lot of the games of Goblin Country I've played, typically there's been someone who's been a bit more reckless, and they've kind of just had it accepted as part of it that their character's just going to kind of die because they go up to a dragon and detonate some fireworks in its chin, and yeah, that's gonna get you killed. Whereas for Bitter Cold, I suppose, I wanted death to be something that you expected in the process. Like, in, these Slay the Spire games like that, you die. You will fail, you will make a misplay, you will run out of cards at the wrong juncture, you might just be unlucky, and you will die. And I wanted that death to be a constant presence in this game, as you are going to lose. The survivor is going to lose, and in fact, one could argue that the Bitter Cold itself doesn't really have a win condition, so much as the Traveller has a lose condition.
Yeah, I guess it's like the Bitter Cold is, it's a force of nature rather than a person. So
it could almost...
A hurricane doesn't win.
Yes.
You just lose your life to the hurricane.
You just survive it or you don't. I mean, there's a large element to that is perhaps one of the main reasons why the Bitter Cold needs to be a two-player game is because it's hard to get that video gamey, your opponent plays a card, you play a card, that two-player, playing against an AI experience when it's just one of you. If I could find a way to hack Bitter Cold to work one player, then I would, because it feels like the kind of experience that worked for that. There, yeah. Just to kind of circle back to the whole death thing, because I realised I didn't really finish that. Yes, in some of the games that we're doing, death is like part of combat. Like, you will die, and you will be able to claw your spirit back together. Your ambient psychic energy can be taken and repurposed into power by other members of your group in the same scene. Your body may be blasted into smithereens and goos everywhere, but your will endures, and you will be able to claw yourself back together. And I think that I just wanted to kind of give that whole thing of try, fail, try again, with a bit more of a role-playing thing to it.
Do you think that is informed in some ways by, your perspective on life?
I mean, I guess. I wouldn't necessarily say that I came into this process writing a lot of myself into it, but I suppose the kind of practicalities of it is just you will fail. The hurricane, the Bitter Cold, will not make itself easy for you. Yeah, as the point is not winning first time, because after all, if you did that, that's great, but then the game isn't that interesting. A big part of the thing is getting up, giving things another go when you fail. There's kind of endurance that I've kind of built up over the years, through our attempts to expand Biscuit Fund Games, through gaining and losing jobs in various circumstances. I guess you could say that kind of determination is something that I've written into the way I want my players to approach my games. Well, the games of this type anyway, yeah.
It's interesting to me, definitely, the fact of doing that with Bitter Cold, because... Or what I find interesting is that Bitter Cold is, at its sort of starting base point, it was adapting some of the stuff I did in Transgender Deathmatch Legend, but the modifications you made to that make death and failure via death this big omnipresence, whereas in Transgender Deathmatch Legend, the intention is more you're going to win. It's interesting to take a sort of the same skeleton and fill it with different organs. That was a disgusting comment I just said, but I'm gonna leave it in the edit.
No, I get it. I quite appreciate that distinction. But yeah, it's as I say, Transgender Deathmatch Legend is in a lot of ways a victory lap. You're going through slam chests, you're beating stuff up, but I think in this game in Bitter Cold, I wanted to create an environment where you constantly have this spectre of death hunting over you. I mean, you've got the pursuit coming after you from the early part of the game. Everything around you, like, you have your burn pile of cards that you've used up over the course of the game, a reminder of everything that you've lost. This creeping spectre of death is clawing in at you in every step of the process. But that's not a reason to give up.
So I guess thinking on the long journey, the life path, what do you think is maybe like the most important thing you've learned over the course of designing games?
I think generally if something doesn't work right, just keep going, keep trying, find something new to try at, because not everything's going to be a hit, but you've just got to keep plugging away.
It is determination. That is the main thing I've got. I was in... Chloe and I have gone from making one-pages and small games and Rebellion 30XX, which we're not going to touch ever again, probably, to producing, producing games that, people have heard of and people have played, and we get to hear stories about that, about the game, stories they tell, the games that they have, and the fun that we've inspired in their lives. And that we wouldn't have got without sitting down, trying, failing, trying again, keeping on going, wrapping it around in the free time that we had. We never gave up on this dream that we had together. And maybe this will never be the thing that we're able to do. Maybe this will never be our perfect our career. Maybe we won't be able to live off this full time, like certain other tabletop game designers I know. But even if that's the case, I want to keep doing it. Even if we're small forever, I have the determination to keep going.
Thank you for sharing. Where can the audience find you? What are the best platforms, places, apps?
Yeah, you can find links to all of our stuff at biscuitfundgames.card.co with 2 R's in the card there. We are on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it.
Twitter, come on.
Yeah. I'm Chloe. She is what are you use now?
I'm Spiteful Moth.
Yeah. You can also find myself as one half of Game Soup, a game design podcast.
I'm the other half. We've not actually mentioned that much in the podcast, but I'm the other half of it.
Yeah. If you want to hear more Kayla or more me, go find that.
Yeah, it's a break from the. I feel like this is serious podcaster Kayla, not like serious. Whereas Game Soup is more like
wackety
jazz hands podcaster Kayla. Yeah, but yeah. I will include everything and links in the episode description. This has been the life path of Biscuit Fund Games. I've been Kayla Dice. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.